Hi, everybody. Please allow me to begin by thanking all of you for choosing to join us here this evening. There's a lot of people doing a lot of amazing work, but most specifically here in District 7080, but of course, across the country and beyond as well. We want to start the evening by sharing the most important, although often unbelieved, fact that says human trafficking and forced labor slavery exists here in Canada. It exists across the globe, in every single community. It's in our schools, it's in our businesses, our streets, our homes, and online. It's genuinely everywhere, and no community anywhere is exempt. One of the scariest facts of the victims here in Canada is that most of the people are, in fact, domestic. That means our kids, our neighbors' kids, our neighbors' kids, our own children in our own schools, in our own streets and parks are being trafficked and shared across Canada. Actually, we know that according to stats, the RCMP shared that 96% of all human trafficking cases in Canada since 2005 are domestic. Again, our kids in our cities. I'm not going to go into too much detail about any of that. We're going to invite some of the world's foremost leading experts. This panel is made up of really intelligent and well-informed and very experienced educators. So I look forward to having you all meet them very soon. Tonight, I'm speaking on behalf of two amazing teams of people. We call them our local team and our global team. Our local team is made up of people from District 7080, and we're working together to move this incredibly important initiative across Canada and beyond. We're working with you together. I'd like to begin by introducing our global team. If y'all can turn your cameras off and then we'll turn it on as we introduce you, that would be great. So we'd like to begin with the infamous Paul Brandt, country music extraordinaire. He is a star beyond stars. He's done so much work for human trafficking. In fact, has founded the amazing Not in My City. And if you've been in an airport, you've probably seen some of Not in My City signage. So I'm going to hand it over to you, Paul Brandt.
Thanks so much, Barb. And it's wonderful to be here with all of you today with our focus on survivors. And the reason that I put it that way is that in the work that we do with Not in My City, we're a facilitative organization that that seeks to find gaps that are being left and facilitate groups to work together in a non-competitive model. And that might seem a little bit strange in a sector like this, but what ends up happening a lot of the time that we found is that people tend to work in silos. They get specialized in a certain direction, and then they only focus on that one thing. They've sort of put the blinders on. I recently had the opportunity here in Alberta, where I am right now, to chair the Alberta Human Trafficking Task Force for the province of Alberta, for the government of Alberta. And we saw about 90 different presenters, incredible, not only experts in subject matter, but also survivors, people who had experienced human trafficking and being trafficked, and everybody had an angle to bring and a perspective to bring. But what we quickly realized is that when we bring all of our efforts to bear, that we can really start to move the needle and make a huge difference. This is an issue that really requires people to take it personally. And to bring whatever special gifts and unique abilities that you have to be able to be a part of the solution. By the end of the work that we did with the government, we had 9 different ministries that were all working together to bring their special angle to the issue of human trafficking, and that's really what it's going to take. We started Not in My City about 5 years ago. We have had a lot of incredible support from across the country, and it's exciting to be able to be here with you today to discuss this issue, keeping survivors in the center of everything that we do.
You know, Paul, I think on behalf of us all, we are honored to have someone like you. The money, your own money that you've spent, that we know you've put to this, your resources, your time, your energy, and your passion speaks so loud and so clear. One of the favorite things that has happened for me is meeting you and the other members on our global team. So thanks for your commitment. We'll be focusing on you very shortly. Next up, I'd like to introduce Phil Calvert. He's the National Director of Development for the amazing International Justice Mission Canada. I must say, these people are working around the world, around the globe, to make the kind of change that we need to see. I'm going to go straight into inviting you, Phil Calvert, to go ahead and take the floor.
Thanks, Barb. It's wonderful to be with you all here tonight. Thank you for making the time to be here and to lean into this conversation. Over 25 years ago, International Justice Mission was founded by our founder, Gary Haugen, who has had the immense pleasure to speak at Rotary Congresses in both Seoul as well as in Atlanta. And he's told me that those are some of the most enjoyable times that he's spent with people around the world who are in this conversation and in this fight. And quite simply, the reason why is because in order to what we've seen over the last 25 years, and I can point to things a little bit later, what we've seen is that what's really required to move the needle is system change. And nobody gets systems quite like Rotary does. It was referenced earlier, kind of the way that you've gone about approaching polio and seeing near eradication of that is simply a show of kind of the understanding how systems can be leveraged in order to make sure that people who are in poverty, who are being trafficked, whatever the case is, can see hope and can see light at the end of the tunnel because the system around them is functioning in a much better way. And so thank you for having me, and thank you for being a part of this conversation.
Thank you, Phil, and thank you to IJM, both international and Canada. We're very grateful for your relationship. Next up, we have Dave McCleary. For any Rotarians on this call, Dave founded RAGAS, which is, of course, Rotary Action Group Against Slavery. He co-founded it, and the work that these people have done, my goodness, it is amazing. He's also the founder of End Human Trafficking and End HT Now, and Dave is truly the mastermind for all of this. When Dave appointed me as the ambassador in our country, I said, okay, what can we do now? And he said, well, and we got on the phone and he connected us, and the rest is very much history. So I, with so much honor and thanks, hand the floor over to you, Dave McCleary.
Well, thanks for having me. Thanks, Barb, for putting this on. Thanks for this amazing panelists. It's just an honor to be with you today. Just one minor correction. Mark Little actually founded it, but I was part of the team in the beginning for Rotary Action Group Against Slavery. But we're just honored to be here because we believe that Rotary is really potentially the solution to ending modern slavery and human trafficking. We've grown tremendously on this issue over the last few years. And the Action Group Against Slavery, a lot of people don't know about what we do, but we're kind of the hub for human trafficking around the globe. We now have members in 62 countries and board members in 6 continents, and we've grown tremendously. I'll tell you a little bit about the story, how I got involved and how it felt like Rotary should get involved in this issue. But we just are honored to be part of this, and we see Rotary as a solution because we're people of action. We've seen presidents of Rotary National been very supportive over the last several years, to include Jennifer Jones, all the way back to Ravi Ravinia. We've done summits with President Carter. We've been on the White House roundtable, and we are so excited about this opportunity in Canada, about some of the things that are happening there and the team there. It inspires me to see what you're doing every day. And so you are an inspiration to me. And I tell people every day that I talk to around the world about the Canadian power that's going on there. And so I'm just honored to be here and be part of your team.
Wow, that you can make me cry. That was amazing. Thanks, Dave. Okay, and next up, very exciting for us to have someone from literally across the world. We have next the founder of the Mekong Club, Matt Friedman. I got to tell you, Matt just came back from weeks and weeks away. In fact, he was here in Canada this last trip and spoke to thousands of people about human trafficking and modern day slavery, and works very closely with our APPG and and pretty much everybody else on this committee. Matt is a force to be reckoned with. And I must say, still recovering from the evil COVID, and yet joined us. And it's what, 2 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock in the morning for you?
It's morning, but it's not that late. It's okay. It's a decent time. Yes.
Okay,
sure.
great. Well, then, thank you. And I now hand the floor over to you, Matt Friedman.
Very good. Well, my name is Matt Friedman. I've been working on the issue of addressing modern slavery for about 35 years. I started my career in Nepal. I was there for 8 years, 5 years in Bangladesh, 10 years in Thailand, worked with a number of governments. And recently, in the last 10 years, founded an organization called the Mekong Club. The Mekong Club works with corporations, the private sector, to help them to understand the issue of human trafficking and what they need to do in order to address it. So we work with the banks, the manufacturers, the retailers, the hospitality sector. And the reason why we do this is because this is a very relevant topic for them. According to the latest statistics, there's about 50 million people in modern slavery. Let's say around 75% in forced labor. 60% of that were associated with supply chains. This is where we get our fish and our food and our apparel and our electronics and all those other things. And so there is a relevance to this particular topic. Why should the private sector be involved? Well, to put into perspective the impact that globally we've had to address modern slavery with all the governments and the NGOs and the United Nations and the corporations, last year, documented cases that we helped was about 0.2%, not even 1%. And so because the private sector has this association with supply chains, because they have a relevance to this particular topic, we have been working with them to educate them, to inform them, to give them the means to understand what it is that they need to do in order to address this. You just heard about 211 that is in the process of moving forward. That bill is super important because what it will do is help corporations of any size to recognize that this is a topic that they have to address. This is a topic that they have to know about. This is a topic that they have to operationalize with policies and procedures and trainings and all the other things that are needed. And so I'm thrilled to be here today. Thank you very much to the organizers. And I think it's a great opportunity for us to educate and inform people about this particular very important topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. And so now I invite all of our panelists to pull their cameras back on. We are going to get into our Q&A. If you've got a question, please note that the team will be monitoring the Q&A line that's open for you for our viewers. So please, if you've got a question, pop it in there. They're going to collate the questions and forward them to us for after the actual interview section. Okay, so we're going to get started. I'm very excited. Okay, I'm getting out my list and we're going to get started. So I look to you, Matt. Can you give us an overview on how you would explain what human trafficking is and hopefully what it isn't?
Okay, so typical kind of scenario that people think about with human trafficking is sex trafficking. A woman gets tricked and deceived into a situation where she's forced to have sex with a certain number of men each day. There's about 6.8 million people in this situation, the latest statistics. But in addition to that, you have a lot of other people who are forced into jobs where, they basically are held in place. They can't leave and they basically don't get paid. So it would be a situation where a young boy is put onto a fishing boat and he's there for about 4 years. He works 17, 18 hours a day. If he doesn't work, he gets tortured and beaten. He lives under these terrible conditions, or the typical kind of sweatshop scenario where a person is in a factory, can't leave the factory, works endless hours, basically doesn't make any money and so forth. So what we're talking about is a person who's tricked and deceived and forced into a situation where they work, but they don't get paid. What it isn't is a person who works in a factory, let's say a sweatshop, makes very little money, but can walk out the door. So the difference between this and exploitation is that the person doesn't have a choice, either because of debt, which holds them in place, or threats that holds them in place, or various other things. And so what we're dealing with here, as I mentioned, 50 million people is the new figure. Post-COVID, we see that there's an increase from 40 million to 50 million, and that's simply out of desperation. You have a lot of people who didn't work for a period of time. They basically had to borrow money, and as a result of borrowing money, they aren't able to pay it back because they don't have any money coming in, and so family members are being taken away. and put into these circumstances. We hear different terminology. Human trafficking, forced labor is basically what we're talking about, but the new terminology is modern slavery. And because slavery is being used, it's very emotive, and as a result of that, there's a lot of kind of interest in this particular topic.
Actually, before we go to Paul, who's going to expand on what forced labor is, I think, Phil, you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, Matt, you did a great job of just kind of outlining kind of the numbers and the big picture and all that kind of stuff. I wanted to perhaps humanize just a little bit of kind of this forced labor dynamic. There's a client that IJM worked with in the last couple of years. Let's call him Dom, who was a migrant worker from Myanmar who was trafficked into the fishing industry out of Thailand. And Dom was much like Matt outlined, desperate, needed some kind of money. Typical scenario that we see time and time again is that there's a broker who's acting as a predator on behalf of someone that's looking for slave labor. And so this broker goes to a poor village, tries to find desperate people in order to kind of the promise of a good job or a better life. And so Dom was one of these people that was swept up in this scheme, and he ended up being put out to sea. And it's really interesting because there's this deepening connection that we're finding between climate change and forced labor, slavery in particular, because of people who act with impunity don't necessarily have regard for law, period. And so whether it's law that's around protecting the human or law that's around protecting the environment. So Dom was swept up in this kind of trap, and he was sent onto a fishing vessel. And the fishing vessel was way out to sea because of overfishing that had caused a lack of kind of market to be able to be done closer to shore. And so he's on one of these vessels that's known for staying at water for years on end, right? So they have supply ships that come and refuel, bring food, all that kind of thing. And Dom ended up being at sea on the same vessel for 6 years. And so by the time he made it back to shore and was able to actually secure getting back to his hometown, the truly heartbreaking part of his story is that by the time he got back to his home village, his son had been swept up in the same scheme.
Oh my gosh.
And so fortunately, we were able to support the rescue of his son as well. And so they're now moving forward in their life. But when we talk about, to support Matt's point, we talk about slavery, we're not talking about being paid poorly to do a job.
Yeah.
We're talking about no choice, no freedom, coercion, intimidation, violence are all parts of the ingredients there.
Thanks. Actually, I said we were going to go to Paul. I apologize. We are sticking with you, Phil, for this. What would you say is the most popular age, and is there a popular age and or gender of this behavior that are more prone to being victims?
Yeah, so statistics on the age of recruitment can be a little bit murky because of kind of the process of getting to when someone is officially defined or been rescued or whatever the case is. That being said, what we found is the kind of average age of rescue within IJM around the world when it comes to sex trafficking, we're talking about 16 to 16 and a half years of age. When it comes to the age of rescue in what we call online sexual exploitation of children, or OSEC, we're talking about 11 to 12 years old. And so within bonded labor or slave labor, we've also seen a variety of ages that goes from infants that are born in slavery to multi-generational slavery that is a simple loan that has been carried on through 3 or 4 generations of a single family unit. And so the age can be quite varied, but generally speaking, when it comes to sex trafficking, we're talking about young women, young boys, overwhelmingly women for sure, overwhelmingly girls. And when it comes to labor, we're talking quite often about entire family units.
All right, we're going to keep going. There's a lot of ways perpetrators or those who we don't really have a name for, the people who are at the bottom of all of this, at the root of all of this, they come in a lot of different shapes and sizes as well. What is the most popular means of recruitment that is being engaged upon right now, or is there a single most popular means? Matt, oh, sorry, Matt, I apologize.
Yeah, okay. So, I mean, social networking is obviously a great recruiting approach. You have these networks that reach out to the entire world, and they talk about how you can make a certain amount of money, and all you have to do is to follow this prescription or take this job or come to us or give us information, all that kind of things. So social networking has become a major force of nature. Now, one of the things that we're seeing in this part of the world, which is only within the last 8 months, is where actually college educated people from Singapore and Taiwan and Hong Kong and mainland China and so forth are being lured to Cambodia with the promise of a good paying job around 5,000 US dollars a month. When they get there, they are put into a van, taken to a center where you have high walls and barbed wires and closed circuit television, and they're forced to scam for 14, 15 hours a day. If they don't, they get beaten, they get tortured. This new phenomena came as a result of COVID. And as a result of this, you see a lot of people caught in this particular web. Another way is recruitment agents in less developed countries that are kind of the middle person. They go into a community and say, how would you like to get a job? You're only making 50 US dollars a month now. How would you like to go to Malaysia and make $250? So they basically lure people into a situation where they eventually get to the capital, sign paperwork and so forth, but put up a certain amount of money that they don't have. They agree to this, not understanding the interest rates and the fees and everything else. And so as a result of this, by the time they get to Malaysia, $1,500 is $4,500. They end up working for years just to pay that capital back.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, basically they're even more impoverished than they were before. So deception and trickery, offering the golden, pot of gold is the lure that often attracts people into these situations.
Dave, I think you had a story you wanted to share, Melissa's story that aligns with this. You can go ahead and share that with us.
Yeah, sure will. It's important. It made it personal for me, but just one thing I'll mention, I'm so excited to see all the district governors here and the leadership with the Rotary, how encouraging that is. And also I'd like to say that, this is a dark topic, but we offer hope. That's what we do every day. I was on a phone call with a colleague of Phil's in Australia today to talk about the incredible work that's being done and people being rescued every day. But for me, it started I was a president of a Rotary Club in 2012, and I was in a conference called the Passion Conference in Atlanta, which Gary Haugen was part of that as well. And I heard the stories about human trafficking, people being trafficked, and I couldn't believe it. Especially I thought it was a third world country, not in my hometown. And so I heard many stories about this. So I met a girl named Melissa through the CNN Freedom Project. Got to know her a little bit, asked her to come speak to my Rotary Club when I was president. She did, and told her horrible stories about being trafficked in downtown Atlanta. And after the meeting, one of our members gave Melissa a big hug. I said, how'd you know Melissa? He said, she used to babysit my kids when she was 12. And so then it wasn't somebody else's problem. This is our problem. This is Rotary's problem. And we're the perfect organization to take this on. Just one quick addition to that. So this is in 2012, and I was on the host committee for the Atlanta Commission in 2017. And they did a candlelight vigil with 60,000 youth in Atlanta in 2012 for that conference. And I remember thinking, what if we did that same candlelight vigil in the center of Atlanta for Rotary International? We were expecting 1,200 people. We had over 14,000 people in downtown Atlanta, inside and outside of Rotary. And what was amazing is we met backstage with Ashton Kutcher and Gary Haugen and Senator Corker and Rebecca Bender. And I told that story about that situation in 2012. We were standing in the exact spot where that happened.
Wow.
And that's the power of Rotary. That's what we do every day. And so just never get discouraged. It's about that one. It's about that one you could help, because you're not only saving that one, you're saving their kids, their families, their other kids. And so one other last thing I'll say is Gary Haugen used to always says, education is doing the work. Never underestimate by telling somebody the story, how it will impact the world. So Thank you.
So powerful. Thanks, Dave. That's a great story. And I shudder to think how many of us would have the same story if we actually figured out what was happening to people we knew 20 years ago. So thanks for sharing. Next up, we have Paul. Paul, there's a difference, and I bring this to you because of the Canadian lens, which is very different here in Canada than it is in the States. What's the difference between sex trafficking and human trafficking laws in Canada? You're so good on this stuff.
Well, I wasn't exactly sure which angle to take on this, but I'll credit a few sources with the Canadian Center to End Human Trafficking, their corridors report. I go into some of that on this. Also, the report that I had the honor of working on, the Reading Stone report that's available online, and also Polaris, just to give people a little bit of a background on the issue of human trafficking and some of the laws that are related. In Canada, we're focusing on human trafficking from the standpoint of the UN's Palermo Protocol. And one of the things that we learned really quickly as we started doing this work here in Alberta about 5 years ago, but when I first was exposed to the issue of trafficking some 18 years ago now, is that definitions are really important. And so it's important for us to talk about what we're talking about when we discuss human trafficking. We talked to high-level police officers here in the province when we first started this work only 5 years ago. And they told us point blank that human trafficking isn't happening in Alberta. And those same people now, after being educated to what the definitions are, what to look for, are now acknowledging that we didn't understand what we were talking about. And so it's exciting to see how much change can happen just by having these conversations, just by telling these stories. The use of a common definition of human trafficking is critical to increasing the knowledge of how this crime happens in Canada. To promote consistent data gathering and analysis, we rely on the Canadian Criminal Code, and it defines human trafficking as recruiting, transporting, transferring, receiving, holding, concealing, or harboring a person, or exercising control. And so you hear all of that, and it's like it's easy to glaze over when you start to hear those legal definitions sometimes. But one of the ways that I really like to think about it when I think about what those definitions are, there's a survivor advocate who is just an inspiration to me and so many of us here in Canada. Her name is Carly Church, and Carly has just, well, she honestly, when she presented to us here in Alberta, she literally changed the way and helped us to write the book on how we were going to address the issue of human trafficking. That survivor lens is so important. I can't emphasize that enough. And I know that all of my colleagues here today would agree that being able to see this issue through the eyes of a survivor is really important, because it gives us angles and helps us to understand the issue and how to address it in a unique way. And she said there's many definitions of human trafficking. The definition that she succinctly summarized, it goes like this. She says there are certain elements which need to be present for human trafficking to exist. Those elements are force, fraud, coercion, and facilitation by a third party or group of people. Somebody is behind the scenes doing it to you and profiting from you. That's the definition of human trafficking. And I think really on both sides of the border, I mean, there's a real spectrum of understanding when it comes to human trafficking that goes everywhere from a real moralist approach, it's just wrong and so we have to stop it, to a feminist approach where the idea that a woman being sold creates inequality. But I think that on either ends of that spectrum, we can find a middle ground to address this issue when we keep the survivor in the center and we focus on this issue as a human rights issue. And so that's something that I know Canada has done a good job of. But one of the things that we try to say all the time at Not in My City is to know better is to do better. And we can always do better. And so we're always pushing, towards excellence in that. And so I'll give you just a little bit of a broad strokes on it there. Hopefully that answers some of the question anyways.
Oh, no, that was great. And I love your line at the end, because hopefully now we've got 80 people online who will know better and hopefully do better tomorrow and pass those stories along. So recruiting, as I said, is becoming a thing. We know that people doing the recruiting can make an awful lot of money per victim. And we also know that there are some surprises around who's doing the recruiting. Dave, I'm going to ask you to speak to that, please.
Sure, sure. And I'll just to add to what Paul said about the importance of getting in the community and creating that paradigm shift on this issue, because the one thing I love about Rotary, in 1984, 83, we decided to eradicate polio. We're on the verge of eradicating polio because we never give up. You know,
Right.
we keep fighting, and that's what it's going to take, an army of people of 1.4 million Rotarians around the world. Well, who's recruiting? This industry is estimated it's a $150 billion industry. How do you get your head around that? It's incredible. And to be honest with you, and any of the other panelists can jump in at any point, but anybody can be recruiting. You know, you're looking at, it's about violence, it's about fraud, it's about manipulation. And so we see recruitment from gang members across regions. We see recruitment from people who just want to make money. We see peer recruitment. Unfortunately, in some communities, they sell their own children to put a roof on their house. And so part of what we've seen with Rotary addressing this issue is that we have those connections within that community, and we've actually been able to go into communities and teach families on how to take care of themselves and empower themselves. So we see recruitment from everybody, and the issue of human trafficking, modern slavery, is the second highest profiting industry in the entire world, and it's an industry that because of the power, because of the money, they can sell those individuals over and over again. Where drugs, you sell it and that drug is gone. So it's pretty much anyone can be recruiting, unfortunately.
Can I ask you?
I would jump in there, Barb, for just a second, if I could, to what Dave is saying there. That's one of the reasons that I'm so excited about this initiative with Rotary, is that there's this concept that they have applied to the eradication of polio. I've heard it described by Simon Sinek. A lot of you will know this idea. It's the infinite game. And that's the kind of mindset that we have to have when we're approaching human trafficking, is it's just this consistent infinite game where we're doing it because we know that it is a good fight. It is the right thing to do. And so we keep showing up. And to the question on who's doing the trafficking, Not in My City focuses a lot on the issue of child sexual exploitation and child trafficking. And we see a number of different tactics being used, but one of the most popular that we see today, aside from the online trafficking that's going on, is the boyfriending technique, where you find a young person who maybe has a low self-esteem, doesn't have a lot of social network around them, and the trafficker will make connections and become their friend, purchase them things, do everything that they can to increase that trust, and then one day flip the switch and then start to require repayment. In Canada, trafficking victims on the sex trafficking side are bringing in over $230,000 per year per victim for the traffickers.
Thanks for adding that. That adds to, something that many of us have been talking about for a while, that organized crime is choosing it as one of the top because it's making so much money. But if we go all the way to the other end of the spectrum, we know the children are trafficking one another, or recruiting rather one another. And I think that this is where it becomes up to every one of us to make sure that we remain really vigilant about how we are spreading the word with our children. Many of us here have experienced trying to share with other adults and having them cover the ears of the children in the same space. And I can't tell you how challenging that is for us all. We need you, and we need your children to know about this. It's happening everywhere, and kids are actually recruiting other kids. So please continue to stay on with us, learn more, and then of course we'll give you the opportunity to connect with us later. Next, I'm going to go to, we did speak briefly, Matt, about how much money is being made per victim. I think that $250,000 amount is the one that we've all been hearing. But can you maybe speak to what that looks like from a corporate lens, how much money people are making and what that looks like? It's a little bit different, of course, from a corporate lens.
Yeah, I mean, let me give you a concrete example. A person from Myanmar is told that he can make money in Thailand. There's strife in the country. He leaves his country, goes to a place called Sumit Sakan, where they have seafood packing company there, knocks on the door. Factory owner comes out, says, "What do you need? I'm looking for a job." "Okay, I'll give you a job. I'll pay you the equivalent of $50 US, but you have to stay in the factory." So he accepts the job, never made more than $25 a month, and now is making this money, works under these horrific conditions, but at least in the back of his mind, he's thinking, I can send money home. I'm kind of succeeding in being the breadwinner for my family and so forth. After a couple of months, goes to the manager and says, "I'd like to be paid." Manager basically says, "Well, I forgot to mention one thing. For you to be here, it cost about $54. You're not even making enough to pay your room and board. And so guess what? You can't leave until you pay this back." High walls, barbed wires around this. So you have like hundreds of people languishing in a situation where every single day that they work, they get deeper and deeper in debt. There's no exit for this. There are no hopes and no dreams, no aspirations, and so forth. So in one case, we did an analysis where we determined that like the person who's in that factory could probably make that factory about $60,000, but to maintain them there is a couple of $1,000s.
Right.
So do the math related to that. You're talking about literally hundreds of people making all of this profit because all the money that they generate from seafood packing goes directly to the manager, to the trafficker, and as a result of that, a great deal of money is made. When it comes to the banks, just the reason why they're interested in this, $150 billion, as had been mentioned. If any of that gets into a legitimate bank, it's money laundering. There was a bank in Australia that was fined $1.3 billion Australian because they allowed online sexual exploitation of children to take place. So the corporations recognize that if they don't address this, there's a risk. But from the standpoint of the traffickers, I'll go back to that $250,000 thing. I had a pimp once tell me that my sex trafficking victims are like an ATM machine. It just keeps generating money. I keep just getting it out because if they make 1,000 Canadian dollars a day, $200 a trick times 5 people, and you're just holding them in place, tremendous amount of profits are made. So this is kind of the situation that we're facing in this part of the world.
Which is probably part of why this is continuing to grow, because it's just so financially beneficial for the traffickers. Madam,
crime does pay.
Yeah, right. Crime,
yeah.
Unfortunately. I'm going to stick with you for 1 minute because we talked about how people find their way out of this horror, but as well as that, if you could add on to that, once people do find their way to freedom, either being rescued by one of these major amazing groups on this call or another way, what are the odds of them returning? So can you maybe take that double-sided question for us?
40% of the victims, survivors that we dealt with in this part of the world in Asia had been trafficked more than once. And the reason for that is that the dynamics that allowed them to be vulnerable to be trafficked in the first place were never completely resolved, which is why it's extremely important after a person is rescued from the harmful situation to give them a mechanism that stabilizes them, addresses their health, psychosocial issues, gets them into a scenario where they're stable, and helps them to identify a possible future job. If you went into this and got into it because you were looking for work but didn't have access to work afterwards, it's very difficult. So in Asia, there's a lot of programs that are set up to basically take these victims, rehabilitate them to the extent that they can get into some type of a work situation. And in one case in the Philippines, they actually take illiterate people who are making good money because in the United States, the real estate industry wants the pictures of the houses to look good. So they send the pictures to the Philippines to illiterate people who don't know much about English, but they can adjust the photos and send them back, and they get a good salary as a result of that. So there's a whole variation of the theme related to that, and you'll hear it from other panelists as well, I'm sure.
Shocking. And when you stop and think about it, as each of you shares a story or a tidbit of information, we realize that it literally is everywhere. It doesn't matter what you look at, what industry, what space, what kind of person, it doesn't seem to matter. It's around them somewhere. And what makes it so insidious, I think. Next, we're going to look to Phil. Phil, there's a lot of trauma. This is kind of expanding on what Matt just said, actually. There's a lot of trauma that happens both to the victim and to our society as a result of human trafficking. And as someone who's really engaged with mental health and well-being, kind of wonder what do you feel about that? What can you share with us? What does that look like?
How much time do I have for this one?
Same amount, 2 minutes. Sorry.
Building off what Matt was just sharing, one of the factors that we know is probably the leading factor for victimization. That's a word. Is trauma, right? Unresolved trauma, and there's an entire array of trauma that exists there. Everything from the feeling of being tricked, right, can be a trauma on its own. The actual physical violence, the depth of that violence, time away from family, the knowledge of what's happening, seeing money changing hands, all those things can contribute to trauma. If I can share two quick stories. One, I was meeting with a group of survivor leaders in South Asia once, and so these are people that are learning kind of how to use drama as a tool to share with other people from their kind of rural settlements about how to avoid the tricks of trafficking or that kind of broker relationship. And so as I'm meeting with these people and having an interpreter explain their stories, one of them tells me specifically that at a rock quarry where he was forced to break rocks, that his daughter died in the midst of being in slavery. And that the owner of the facility gave him less than half an hour to go and bury his daughter. And so he's telling me through his tears that his biggest regret is not marking the tree that he buried his daughter by. And that for him, that was far, far worse trauma than the physical violence.
Wow, that's
and likewise, I mean, the phenomenon of OSEC has been mentioned a couple of times, the online sexual exploitation of children. And doing some research for a TEDx talk that I did on that topic a number of years ago, was in the Philippines interviewing some of our clients there. And the part that hit me like an absolute brick was the realization that the trauma was so much deeper because the abuse was happening inside of their own home, facilitated by their parents. And so trauma is a deeply embedded part of it, and working towards reducing people being re-victimized has everything to do with trauma. And so one of the things we talk about all the time is that we see a wheel of about 21 domains of care that we want to see people kind of walking through and having certain markers around to make sure that they can kind of live a life beyond what they're doing. And that takes years and years and years. And so it's the point of rescue is the very beginning of a very long journey for a lot of people.
And for the communities from whence they come as well. I think that tree story is one of the saddest I've heard in a long time. Paul, we're going to go to you next. We don't need to go into too much detail about what the laws are, but if you can, we don't need to name them, but if you can give us an overview of what's happening, because I know you and Not in My City do some incredible work along with the likes of the APPG, changing the system here in our country. Can you mention a few of those and how that might affect the current climate that we're in?
Sure. Yeah, again, Not in My City tries to facilitate, and so we're trying to kind of, be the funnel, and then bring everything together, and also then go out and connect people. And so we stand on the shoulders of giants, people like Joyce Smith, who was a real pioneer here in Canada, and the way that she did her work, introducing 2 private member bills that ended up being passed. And I think about Arnold Bierson and all the great work that he is doing, and the APPG are doing, and all the bills that are in progress right now, protecting young persons from exposure to pornography, fighting against forced labor and child labor, and the Supply Chains Act, acts to amend the criminal code, the Stopping Internet Sexual Exploitation Act. But the one that I'm probably most intimately familiar with here in Alberta is Bill 8 that was passed in the last couple of years. It's the Protecting Survivors of Human Trafficking Act. And this one's really important because it's kind of changed the game and it's holding people accountable in a new way. One of the things I think is most important about this law is that not only does it help with police having new measures to bring warrants and remove survivors from trafficking situations, but it's also established a process for protection orders and has created the tort of human trafficking. And that gives survivors the ability to sue their traffickers. So we hit them in the pocketbook. And I know that Matt will agree that that is a very key strategy when it comes even to labor trafficking. It's about hitting people in the pocketbook, because that's really the only language a lot of time that traffickers will really pay attention to. You know, we're talking about such brutal victimization, you know, and you know, Phil, and what you're talking about, you know, one of the things that we discuss a lot amongst our group and just in general with human trafficking is that human trafficking in all of its forms is an outcome of vulnerability. And you know, one of the things that really struck me recently, and I'll finish with this, but it's important, I think, for us to remember this idea, is that around 70 to 90% of children and women who end up in the sex industry were first abused as children.
Yeah.
There's no other industry in the world that actively seeks out to exploit victims of abuse in this way. And so I think that that's something for us to all keep in mind, is that the people that end up being trafficked, most of the time they've experienced some kind of really intense trauma that has put them in the position to be exploited.
Yeah, definitely. Unfortunately, I'm going to skip right over, only in the nature of time. I'm sorry that we don't have the opportunity to expand on all your answers, but because we are limited for time, we're jumping from topic to topic. But we can't do this discussion, Paul, without having the missing and murdered Indigenous women represented on this call. And I look to you to share a little bit about what role do they, all of them, play in our work.
Well, you know, Indigenous people make up 4% of Canada's total population. But right now, the statistics are showing us that they represent over 50% of trafficking victims in this country. So that small 4% of people represent over 50% of trafficking victims in this country. And I think there are a lot of different reasons for that. You know, generational trauma, and the issue that creates in regard to vulnerability. And I'd also point out, you know, people think about this issue a lot of the time like it's something happening somewhere else. And you talked about, Barb, you know, the insidious nature of it. 93% of human trafficking victims in Canada are Canadian.
Yeah,
they're not coming from some other country, right? And the greatest risk factor right now on the sexual exploitation and trafficking side is, of course, being a girl. But on that Indigenous piece, huge vulnerabilities there that we need to be aware of.
I'm going to actually take this follow-up from you, Phil. Go ahead. Thanks, Paul, so much.
Yeah, Paul, that's awesome. One of the things that I'm noticing quite a few of the questions in the box as well. I remember when I was in college, I was doing a sociology class, and we were doing it in downtown East Side Vancouver, and kind of just being immersed in the culture there. And this was right around the discovery of the Picton farm and everything that was happening there. Yep. And there was a funeral service right in the kind of geographical center of the downtown East Side, and with I think it was 500 unmarked graves. And it sounds like a depressing space, but it was a really hope-filled space because it was self-organized by women that were working in the area that were trying to find a way to create ceremony around the loss that was there. And I think that's, as we think about kind of what's the small things, what can an individual Rotary Club do, what's, you know, all those things, ceremony matters a lot because it gives place for emotion to actually have a seat at the table. And I think that's a lesson that we can learn a lot from the missing and murdered Indigenous women kind of world, is the usage of ceremony and why that matters for people to be able to enter into conversations.
Thank you. Thank you both. We've got so much to cover. The questions are coming in. Just want to let you know to our viewers, our team is collating the questions and they're coming to me, and we'll be moving on to those shortly. We have two more things we want to address here on the panel first. The next one goes to Matt. Matt's focus is a lot of work that Matt does is around business and corporate lens. So business owners and everyday citizens, all of us here on the call, what are, or are there certain signs that we should all be aware of when we're out and about doing our daily thing?
Yeah, I mean, I did this presentation tour across Canada and North America, and as part of that, I had at least 9 women coming to me. They were all women, they were all mothers, and they said, well, you know, when I went to the airport, I saw this thing and it didn't seem right, or I was at the park, or I was at the bus station, and so forth. And so even years later, they remembered this and remembered it to the extent that they were coming to me and saying, after listening to what you just said, I think that's what it was, but I didn't know what to do. There are hotlines. Polaris puts out a hotline that has a number. Basically, what we're seeing across Canada and the United States is a lot of emphasis on helping people to understand that there are certain signs. If you see an adult with a young person, it doesn't look as if they match, if she's inappropriately dressed, if basically she doesn't make eye contact, if he or she is the one who's controlling the person, et cetera, et cetera. As a result of all of those things, there are things that people can learn. But it's not enough just to see it and to say, oh, well, I think there's something wrong with this. You got to then take it to the next level where you actually act. Now, in Thailand, we used to go to the high schools and talk about, if you see certain characteristics, here's a number, you can call this. I think we got about 22 calls, and 21 of the 22 happened to be human trafficking cases. Because again, many of us have this gut sense of, well, what I'm seeing here is inappropriate. It doesn't look like it's right, but I don't know what to do with it. So we really need to get people over the line in order to be able to address this situation. I just, about 8 months ago, I was dealing with a senator from within Canada who got a call from somebody who said, I saw this situation. She actually took some photographs and sent it to this person. She approached me and we tried to piece it together, but it was too late. You almost have to do this in real time. So even if it's not a situation of modern slavery, if you suspect it might be, we still have to basically try to act on this. And, hopefully as a result of this process, something tangible is going to happen.
Matt, I would like, or anybody here actually on the screen, because I know that this is reflective of a lot of the people on the call's question before we get to Dave. We've heard things like a motel using an inordinate amount of towels, or people putting little ties on places, or little signs. Or we heard when some of the work we've done locally was focused around signs to look for in your child, like all of a sudden bringing new things home and maybe losing focus, maybe being tired. Some of the signs that could be confused with drug use, but certainly it gives us a heads up as parents and caregivers and leaders in our community. Does anybody want to add to signs that our viewers can watch for? Anyone?
One of the focus points for Not in My City has been the international airports across Canada. We're in about 9 airports across the country now, and every time we launch one, another one signs up, which is wonderful. And one of the signs that we push people towards, I think Matt, really touched on this, but in the airport scenario, it's who's controlling the documents a lot of the time too. So that person who is the trafficker would answer all the questions and often be in control of the documents. And something as simple as noticing that has actually changed policy in most airports now, where you have to hold your own document. It's just a simple thing. And so that's definitely one of the cool success stories that we've started to see in airports since this started.
From the banking standpoint, we do a lot of training for banks, and bank managers say, well, we don't have an issue until you say to them, do you ever have a person come in with 11 young women, and this person goes up and takes all their documents, and if you try to talk to them, they say, no, well, they don't want to do it. I'm the person you're dealing with. And when you talk to them, they look nervous, et cetera, et cetera. So simple training on that can help to identify victims in a way that or ordinary people can't, because it's right at the moment when the potential viewing of this takes place. The same is in hospitals, where you have a person who sees an individual who has certain characteristics. That hospital scenario is a great opportunity to determine whether a victimization is taking place.
And to
You know,
that,
88%, Barb, and this comes from Hani Stoklosa, and this is because of Rotary that this connection was made, because of a seminar that I had a chance to hear her on that was facilitated by David Ragas. She comments about how 88% of trafficking victims talk about how they accessed healthcare while they were being trafficked. And 88% of trafficking victims also say that they interacted with a professional who failed to intervene on their behalf. And so it's so much about that education on the front line and helping people to see the signs, and then also having a community response model in place that can be triggered quickly to be able to intervene.
well, infrastructure. And to that point about hospitals also, one of the things that we learned locally from somebody who's doing that in local hospitals said that the scariest part is that most victims don't even realize they've been victimized. That's how well some of these people are doing their job. So we're going to actually wrap this at this portion of it. Dave, we have a lot of people asking about what Rotarians can do. I wonder if you want to do that now, or if you want to do that when we get to the Q&A. Maybe take a minute now and tell our viewers
Sure.
what Rotary can do.
Yeah, there's a lot we can do. It's interesting too, what you were just talking about. One of the things that we did at Rotary was partner in the Super Bowl and do training within the Super Bowl. And there was one case in Atlanta where we actually there was 19 or 39 missing children. We took those brochures to hotels, handed out to the front desk. And at one hotel, they said, that girl's in the room. And we had the helpline to call.
Wow.
So that's the power that we can have. And, as far as Rotary go, just one thing I'll mention too, is that, as we all know, Rotary has 7 areas of focus, and people often ask, where does human trafficking and modern slavery fit into it? It's the umbrella of everything, because with the absence of freedom in the community, we can't accomplish any of our goals that we want to accomplish. People often ask about clean water. If a girl can't go to a well or water treatment center for fear of being beaten or raped, then that well is rendered useless. So freedom is the key to everything we do. And just one quick story about Rotary is that several years ago, I spoke to a Rotary Club in South Georgia in the U.S., and the owner of the local McDonald's decided to print the Polaris hotline, which is North American hotline for trafficking victims, on his paper tray liners. They rescued 5 girls in 1 month. That
Wow,
Rotarian did what
great
he could do with his
idea.
sphere of influence. And that's kind of what I see Rotary doing. And there's president-elect trainings that you can speak at. We did, I think, 13 president-elect trainings across the world last year. District conference programs, we're doing several on there. Zone institutes, police training. Just one other quick story. We did a police training in my home community not long ago, and the policeman was called to mom's home because she thought the daughter was having a mental health crisis. He had been to our training, realized that she was being trafficked. She was 15, living at home, trafficked at a high school. We got her into a restoration center, and she's doing amazing now. And that's the power of Rotary. Every aspect of this issue we can work on. And we have on this amazing panelists on this call, an amazing organization that we partner with, Not in My City, IGM, Macon Club. Y'all are just leading the way. And so I just honored to be a part of this with you, and look forward to seeing how Rotary can help. And we'll give you our contact information.
We will.
I've given a few examples, but there's thousands of those.
We're going to, before you say another word, we're going to have our team throw up the RAGAS slide. RAGAS is doing incredible work. We're about to say something very, very exciting, but we're waiting a minute. We're going to share something very exciting with our viewers. Can we speak to resolution 21R-28 and then put that up for a moment? Thank you to all of our DGs here. So this resolution was recently passed, 21R-28, encouraging all Rotarians to oppose the growing problem of modern day slavery. Thanks. We can put up the RAGAS slide now. That would be great. So it is a primary focus for us here in Canada and across the globe. And we really are hoping that Rotarians across Canada, at least for now, will help us to make the change that we're looking for. This is our Rotary Action Group Against Slavery. This is the, you can learn more about it there at the ragas.online site. But we're going to invite you to join our site, website. So we have RAGAS, District RAGAS. We're calling it CRAGAS, so it's Canadian RAGAS. And the committee that you met here earlier is the people doing the hard work for this. And we want you to sign up to join RAGAS today. So please take a moment, get your club, get everybody in your club, join up, and we will, we're going to soon be receiving regular notification from RAGAS International, and we'll be making sure that we forward that out to y'all moving forward. So that's RAGAS. We really want you to join. The next slide before we get to our questions again, and the last announcement before our big announcement, is the CNOY, that's Coldest Night of the Year. We invite team members, Mahmoud and Rachel, if you're on the line, to go ahead and share a little bit about this event.
Hello, can you hear me? Thank you. So thank you, Barb, and thank you, the panelists and those who are joining us from here across the continent. We have another event that will be, we call it the coldest night of the year in Canada, and that is February the 25th. And this initiative has been happening since 2001. It was essentially designed to ensure that we see and hear the voices of those otherwise unrecognized and marginalized populations. So we ask, what is that? People walk together or virtually, mostly together, as we all strive to raise money for local charities. This great Rotary District 7080 will be walking as a group, and we will meet in Elora, in the town of Elora. Details, you will see them on the website. And we would love to see you all there. Although all monies raised locally will be going towards the safe house within our district, if you would like to walk with us while raising funds in your community for a space closer to you, that's great too. That is, again, the power of Rotary, and that is what People of Action we do. But there is more. As we are recognized that there are many cities, provinces, and states present here tonight. If you would like to walk in your city, and or you would like to raise money for to end human trafficking, safe house near you, you can do that too. We would love to hear from you. We are here to help you and guide you, and we would love you to join us in some way, shape, or form. Any amount of help, we will eradicate this. And again, this is just the beginning. Thank you, Brenda. Sorry. Thank you, Barb. I'm sorry. Yeah.
It was you. Hello? Are we good? Okay, thanks, Mahmoud, so much. That was really well done. Okay, this is the most exciting moment before we get to our questions. This is the reason that we are all here today. So a lot of work has happened to allow us to make this announcement that we are working as a collective. That's what the purpose of this, one of the primary purpose of these two groups' work is to be the first country in the world to make a pledge to say we have zero tolerance, net zero tolerance for human trafficking in Canada. And that is the biggest pledge, the first of its kind around the world. And we are making this happen. But we need you to do that. We need your help. We need you to help make the pledge. We need you to commit to the work that we plan on doing. We will be hosting an opportunity in Winnipeg in April at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, where we will be making this pledge public. We're working closely with, as I mentioned earlier, the APPG, who are guiding us on how we make this happen. And we look forward to sharing that between us all, we actually succeeded. So in this pledge, there's a couple of things that we're looking for. One, we want you to make the pledge from your heart and commit to doing whatever you can. And two, we're asking every Rotary Club across the country to consider making $1,000 pledge. We're trying to raise between $100,000 and $150,000 so that we can do this and get it done. It will involve seeing a lot of survivors at this particular event that, of course, we're going to take care of. So lots of pieces. I'm happy to share any of those pieces with you, but please agree to take the pledge. Rotary is changing the world. Are you in?
Yeah, Barb, I'll end HT. I'll pledge 1,000. Thank you for.
Yes, thank you. That means that's our first $1,000 pledge. Thank you, Dave from NHT Now. You're going to make me cry. That's very, very exciting. And Dave has started the proverbial ball rolling by making the very first pledge to do that. So we will be sending you the link, or have we got the link here to make the pledge, comms team, and show people how they can donate from their club or as individuals. $1,000 is what we're looking for from hopefully 100 clubs across the country, so we can make this happen. Sorry, comms team, can you just add for us where we will be able to see the link to make the donation? Is it on the chat? Just a voice?
Yes, it's there now.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. You can find the link to make your $1,000 pledge in our chat. We will be the first country in the world to do this. Okay, so now we're going to move to the questions. We're exactly on time. We're going to move to the Q&A. Stay if you like, leave if you need to, but the Q&A is probably going to be, for me, one of the most exciting pieces, because that's where we hear the real nitty-gritty of what you want to know and listen to the way that these world leaders share it with us. I'm going to start with a question for Phil. Phil, how do you think, panelists, or how do you, Phil, think that we can target the demand for sex trafficking?
Yeah, that's I think it's Kathy wrote that question. Really, really good question. There's been a lot of conversation about the problem today, but that's a really solutions-oriented question, which I deeply appreciate. Going after demand, right? So functionally, like we talked about slavery, human trafficking, business terms quite a bit, right? How much does an individual person make for a perpetrator? What's the scale of the economic impact? If we continue down that language, supply and demand in economic theory matters a lot. And so we know that vulnerability creates the supply, right? But we know that bad actors, people that are looking to cause harm, is what causes the demand. The way that we go after demand is providing a reliable deterrent to make sure that the risk equation is in favor of a potential victim versus being in favor of a potential perpetrator. Wow. And so Matt earlier referenced a $1.3 billion fine that was levied against a bank in Australia. That bank has joined with IJM globally to create a best practices center in the Philippines around going after online exploitation of children. One of the reports that center, the ENDOSEC Center, has generated is talking about the minimums as kind of like looking at individual countries and what is the minimum amount of time that is levied on average of a sentence for someone that's been involved in OSEC. Canada is a really, really low on that list, like shockingly low. And what we've seen in districts around the world is that when you have a reliable deterrent and it's enforced consistently, and that survivor voice is listened to, you see a dramatic reduction in the prevalence of the crime. We've seen that in the Philippines, we've seen that in South Asia, we've seen that in Guatemala and Uganda. It's a repeatable formula that going after demand by providing a reliable deterrent, by going after impunity and replacing that impunity with accountability for crime has a dramatic effect. And that's one of the things that I would love to see in that zero tolerance policy is a commitment to taking the crime seriously and actually having enforcement of laws that mean something.
You'll note, Phil, that we, at the beginning of our journey, we considered looking to change the laws, and we realized that that would take an awful lot longer with no guarantee of success. But having our country come out publicly and be the first in the world, because of us, to be the first in the world to say that we pledge to have zero tolerance is very exciting. And hopefully that's how we're going to get there. I've got a lot of questions, so I'm going to move on. The next question goes to you, Paul. It's coming from Alberta. How much more knowledgeable have you become about human trafficking here in Alberta, nationally and internationally, in your role as chair of the Human Trafficking Commission for the government of Alberta?
That's a great question. And I think that one of the reasons that I was so excited about being a part of this event, why I'm so excited about the upcoming event at the Canadian Museum for Human Rights, is the part of the strategy for success when it comes to human trafficking is, it's a position of humility and teachability. You have to always put yourself in a position, no matter how long you've been in the situation of understanding human trafficking, of being able to listen. And I think that hearing over 91 presenters during the 2 years that we did the task force, you hear the issue of human trafficking from so many different places, so many different lenses, and you can't help but learn. I mean, even being on a panel like this and hearing my colleagues speak, every single time there's something that sort of tweaks and you see it in a little bit of a different way. You make new connections, and so I would say that it was very helpful. I would also say that there's something that everyone who's on this call is going to experience. I've seen this happen time and again over the last 18 years. There's a moment where you have this aha moment and you suddenly understand what human trafficking is all about. I joke with people, it's a little bit like an information grenade. You throw it out there and it's such a big issue that it's just hard to figure out. And it's almost too big or too horrible. You can't actually quite, grasp it.
Yeah.
But then all of a sudden your eyes are going to be open and you're going to start to see things. And then you're going to have an aha moment where it becomes personal. My aha moment overseas was meeting a little girl who was 5 years old that was being sold for the purposes of sex 6 to 8 times a night. And I asked myself, what am I going to tell my daughter that I did about this?
Good.
What am I going to teach my son about how to respect and interact with women? And it became personal. And I think that, the time with the Human Trafficking Task Force, times like this with us being able to share stories and our experiences and our knowledge, those are important. But I would just really encourage all of you to keep on pushing and make this a personal fight. We can't arrest our way out of this problem as much as justice is so important. We can't think our way out of this problem. We have to feel our way out of this problem and continue to show up every single day. And so that's probably been one of the things that I've learned that's been the most valuable in this journey.
And I love to see the emotion. This is who you are, Paul. And this is one of the reasons we're so appreciative that you're part of this pledge and that it's just who you are and what you do. It's a great question. I think this one's going to go to Matt next, and then we've got one for Dave. So Matt, as an individual and as an employee, what actions can I take to help stop forced labor, slavery, and human trafficking?
Well, I want to tell a story to kind of before I answer that. And that is years ago, I was interested in writing a book. So I went from shelter to shelter to interview the women and girls. Went to one shelter. There was a girl named Gita. Every time I approached her, she said, no, I don't want to give my story. But she sat and listened to all the other interviews that I did. When I was finishing and leaving, Gita comes running up and says, I changed my mind. You can have my story. So Gita sat on one side of the table, the rest of us on the other side of the table. And over a 3-hour period, she told the worst story I'd ever heard of rape and torture and betrayal and everything else. Honestly, didn't know what to say to her. Finally, I turned to her and I said, wow, Gita, you must be so angry at the traffickers for the horrific things that they did to you. She paused. Then she said, no, I'm angry at you and you and you. She pointed at us. She said, where were you? Said that every single day she prayed for somebody to come and help her. Nobody came. She said she went to school till she was 12. She knew that everything out there was right out in the open. It was illegal. Nobody was doing anything. She said she wasn't angry at the traffickers. She said they're just bad people being bad people. She said she was angry at the good people a society for allowing a 15-year-old girl to be commercially raped 7,000 times, only to eventually get AIDS and she was dying. So she pretty much called us all out. She basically said, I recognize that the 20, 30,000 people around the world are only helping 0.2%. For this to change, everybody has to kind of take a stand and say, we're talking about slavery, modern slavery. It's something that goes all the way back to the Bible and the beginning of time in terms of being horrible and, wars were fight over and so forth. So one of the things you need to do is just to learn about this issue. And then once you learn, you need to teach people. You need to be a responsible consumer. You need to kind of, before you buy things, go on and see whether or not the organizations that you're buying from are doing the right things. You need to report things when you see it. You need to volunteer. There's a lot of organizations that can benefit, and that's where Rotary comes in, a service above self, and lastly, raise money in order to give it to the right organizations to address this. So if we could get 10 million people to do one thing a year, that adds up to quite a bit.
Great. Really well said. Thank you, Matt, so much. Dave, we're going to go to you. This is an interesting question. I'm going to read it verbatim. What did the stats say about refugees and immigrants being used as modern slaves? And the second half is, would providing language services to refugees help them by establishing and sharing what's happened to them? So the first half is, what did the stats say about refugees and immigrants being trafficked?
Well, yeah, obviously, with the situation going on in Ukraine, is for one good example. We work with A21 quite a bit there in their office there, and there are a lot of immigrants that are they're helping in Ukraine and other areas. So obviously, with the situation, but to that is a terrible problem. But to the point that other panelists may feel, and some and other ones, is that these are our kids, these are our people in our community, and we need to recognize that. But the one question I would like to, or two quick questions I would like to get to, is what can we do as a Rotarian? Because for me in 2012, I was like, what do I do? And so it began with starting in your club, creating a committee to talk about human trafficking and learn more about the issue. We have the resources to help you. And the other one that's really important to our action group is education prevention. We received a Rotary National grant a few years ago in Sacramento, California. We have now educated over 500,000 students across the country. And what's amazing about that, we're not only helping to prevent trafficking, but it's empowering youth to do good for others. And we've seen that just empower youth to really want to help on this issue. And so we've created a toolkit on our website for education prevention. We've also working with a lady named Manal Davis out of Houston, Texas, that wrote protocol for the World Cup that's going to be in North America in a few years. And we're going to be working with her to create a protocol for Rotary to use. So when we travel, when we have an international convention, what hotel are we staying at? Are they following human rights laws? Those are all things that we can do as Rotarians. We've got general managers of hotels in our clubs. We've got police officers, we've got law enforcement, educators, business leaders. So every aspect of trafficking we can address. And I'm just excited about this opportunity. I'm excited to work with these amazing panelists, and look so forward to the event in April. It'll be a model for the world. So you can all be part of that in Canada.
Yeah, very, very exciting indeed. Get your pledge in, guys. So next question, we have just a few left. I'm actually going to go to Paul on this one. Can you explain the difference between, and I have to be fair to our panelists, they have no idea what questions I'm throwing at them. So we do have to give them a minute to prospect or figure out what they want to say. So the question for you is, can you speak to the difference between human trafficking and human smuggling? Great question, by the way.
I think we should pitch this around a little bit, because I know that the other panelists will have their angles on this too. But there's the transportation of people across borders, and there can be connections between human trafficking and human smuggling. A lot of times, the reason that people are trying to get out of certain countries or into certain situations is to find work. There's vulnerabilities, or to get away from a dangerous situation, and often because of those vulnerabilities can also find themselves being trafficked. That force, fraud, or coercion facilitated by a third party. Someone forces you to do something, and you're not getting the benefit of the work that you're doing, or you're being forced to do things that you don't want to do. So that would be my my input on that, and I'm sure the other panelists have ideas there too.
Thanks, Paul. Anybody want to speak to that or add to that?
I'll just say one thing is that, like, if you pay somebody to get you across the border and you don't necessarily have the sufficient money to cover that, then all of a sudden you are vulnerable for them to say, well, you owe us money, and that's where a lot of the exploitation takes place. So a lot of people think that smuggling and human trafficking are one and the same. They could be, but in some cases, a person pays to get across the border and they get the service. Other times they pay to get across the border and they're exploited at the other end because of, some kind of indebtedness.
Anybody else want to add anything that differs from that? Phil or Dave?
I was just going to add just one quick thing. I visited the Mexican border recently with Homeland Security. And unfortunately, what happens is when they get to the border, they contact somebody, which they say may be their uncle or some person they know. They have to release them to that person. And Homeland Security has no idea if they're being trafficked or not. So those numbers are way underreported, unfortunately, across not just the US, but across the world.
Thanks. This one goes to anybody because I don't know who would be aware. I'm looking to possibly Phil and Dave because of your international work, but Matt, you do too. Can somebody speak to how much is known on forced labor slavery and human trafficking in Haiti? I personally lived not far from there for a while, and I'd be curious to see how this answers. Any specific info on Haiti?
A lot. Even post earthquake, you have that country's never fully recovered. And as a result of that, there's tremendous desperation. Whenever you have desperation, you have people who will agree to all kinds of things. There's indebtedness that is the driving force that draws people into the situation, the desire to have a better life. I would just say a huge number of people, because there's not a lot of remedies that are there that are kind of big enough and assertive enough and well funded enough to really make a significant difference. So it's a lot of people. I don't know what the numbers are. Slavery Index can give you some estimate. Slavery Index 2016 would look at Haiti and give numbers, but I think those numbers are much higher than what they are actually reporting.
And let's take a minute.
Let me just add one thing real quick to that. So I went to Haiti with my Rotary Club before I knew about this issue. And after I found out about this issue, I saw several cases of trafficking in Haiti that didn't realize it was trafficking. And that's where that whole education prevention piece is so important with Rotary.
Somebody asked online, and although we've addressed it in a few ways, I just want to reiterate, somebody asked about what can we do as individual citizens, and something that the marker was, what can I do that's meaningful? I think being aware is the first most meaningful thing we would hope that you would take from today. The second is to share the word, join groups like RAGAS, no cost. You get constant information about what's happening, and then get you and yours involved, whether you are here as a Rotarian or not. We ask you to reach out to your personal communities, your circle of influence, and see what you are prepared to do. How much work are you prepared to get into? Simple answer is fundraising and sending money to these organizations, doing the hard work. Stay in touch with us. In fact, we'll be sending you the links for Coldest Night of the Year, for how to pledge, and to our RAGAS district website, so that you can learn more and you can get the information that you need. Basically, I'm looking here, Paul said something about a free course. Paul, do you want us from Not in My City? Thank you so much. What we're going to do is we will take that, comms team, if you could take that and add it to the list of links that we're sending out. And if anybody else on this panel has something, I know you talked about the Slavery Index, Matt. If anybody has something you think would be pertinent to our viewers following today's webinar, please forward it to our communications team and we'll get it out there. And so that pretty much wraps it up. This was the main purpose of tonight, was to let you all know the good work that's happening because of the people on this panel, because of the RAGAS District 7080, because of the work that we're all doing, and the pledge that Rotary is going to make. Look, we almost eradicated polio. It's left in 2 countries after being in hundreds. We can do this. We can do this as Rotarians. We can do this as friends of Rotarians. We can do this under any umbrella we want. Make the pledge, sign your name, say you want to be a part of this, and you can. And that's it. Thank you all so much. I'd like to look first to on my screen, Dave McCleary. Thank you for joining us. Gentlemen, if you'd like to stick around for a second, that'd be great. Thank you to Phil Calvert Dave from RAGAS and NHT Now. We've got Phil Calvert, the program developmental lead for International Justice Mission Canada. We have Paul Brandt, amazing country music singer and founder of Not in My City. And we have Matt Friedman, founder of the Mekong Club. And these guys are doing the work. Thank you all so much for joining us. Have a great day. Stay well, stay safe, and we're sending blessings your way.